editor on standby to help us. We have got an agent too, most likely. Our friends and family are supporting us, even though they probably think we're still a little bit nuts. And we've had the experience of publishing and writing a whole first book. So with that in mind, surely book 2 is easier to write than book 1. Well, I can tell by the faces of the panelists and that's not the case. So I'd like to welcome Nikki Smith, Trevor Wood, Tom Benjamin, Emily Koch and Philippa East, our wonderful panelists who are going to tell us why book 2 is so much harder to write than book 1. But before we get into the questions, it would be amazing if you could all give us a little introduction. So Tom, do you want to kick us off with your introduction, please?
Yeah, sure. I'm Tom Benjamin. I'm author of the Bologna Set mystery series, which kicked off with my first novel, the one that I spent years on my own, unappreciated by anyone writing, A Quiet Death in Italy. And that has been followed by my second, The Hunting Season here, which follows my Bologna-based English detective as he unravels the mystery of a missing truffle super taster somewhere in the hills surrounding Bologna.
That sounds amazing. Nikki, do you want to go next for us, please?
Yes, hi, I'm Nikki Smith. I've written 2 novels and my first one was called All in Her Head, and my second novel, which I think, don't know which side it is, that side of me, is called Look What You Made Me Do, and they're both psychological thrillers, and Look What You Made Me Do tells the story of the dark secrets that are hidden beneath the surface of a seemingly perfect family.
Ooh, exciting. Emily, would you like to go next for us?
Yes, hi, thanks Lauren. My name is Emily Koch. I've also written 2 novels. My debut was If I Die Before I Wake, and my second, Keep Him Close, is a dark domestic drama about the friendship between a woman whose son has died and the mother of the boy accused of his murder.
Ooh, that sounds good one. Trevor, what about you?
Hi everyone, I'm Trevor Wood, the author of the Dagger award-winning The Man on the Street, and the sequel One Way Street, which I'm contractually obliged to describe as gritty crime thrillers set in Newcastle's homeless community.
Amazing. And Philippa, last but definitely not least.
Hello everyone, good evening. I'm Philippa East, author of Little White Lies, shortlisted for the CWA Dagger, but pipped at the post by the lovely Trevor with his
runner-up, Philippa, runner-up.
And Safe and Sound. So they're both come under the broad umbrella of psychological thrillers, but I also try to write with quite a sort of psychological bent, really. Safe and Sound is a mystery suspense book about a young, pretty, charismatic, full of life woman who is found dead in her bedsit, and her death had gone unnoticed for 10 whole months.
Wow, exciting. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for those amazing introductions. Your books all sound fantastic. So perhaps let's dive into why book 2 is so much trickier than book 1 to write. And I think perhaps one of the first challenges can be that actually you do have that editor and agent weighing in, and they can weigh in when we're still at the idea stage and we don't even really know what the book's about, which can be a real minefield for us. Philippa, what was your experience with this?
Well, so it's a really good point, Lauren, actually, that I think that if we're really thinking about getting published with our first books, we kind of almost don't sit down and write the idea or write the book unless we feel like we've got a really good idea. But with our second books, we kind of have to have an idea because we're trying to get another publishing contract, or we've got a publishing contract that means we've got a deadline and we have to deliver. I I thought I was doing brilliantly with this whole thing, right? So I basically got Little White Lies really up to scratch, and my agent and I were on the cusp of sending it out to publishers, which obviously is a really kind of tense time. And as we were putting a submission package together, my agent said to me, like, but have you got an idea for book 2? Because it'd be great for us to submit a manuscript for book 1 and an idea for book 2, so that we can hopefully get a 2-book deal. And I was like, well, guess what, Sarah? Yes. So I said, I've got a whole idea. The first chapter of this book has been shortlisted in the Jericho Writers First Chapter Award, and so has the pitch. And I've written a whole outline, and it's like, I'm totally nailing it, Sarah. So she was like, oh, lovely. Well, send me the outline. And I sent her the outline, and she was like, no. Oh, she said it's kind of just all the wrong genre, Philippa. And I was like, shit, she's right. And actually, I think it was a really good idea for a book, but it was just too kind of just too different from Little White Lies. And actually, Little White Lies is a really good example of the kind of books I want to write. And I'd kind of just got an idea and gone in a bit of a different direction. So she was like, do you have any other ideas? And I was like, well, I've got this like 10 lines of scribbled notes that's on this scrap of paper by my bedside. Like, it's about this thing about this, like, I watched a film called Dreams of a Life about this woman called Joyce Vincent who hadn't been found after her death for like 2 years. And I've sometimes thought about writing a book to do with that. And she was like, that sounds good. Can you write me a blurb pitch by Monday? And I was like, oh, and I had a like terrible cold at this point as well. So I was really ill. And I was like, sure. So I wrote up this like 2-paragraph blurb pitch. And it kind of ended with like, but what is, what's the answer? Like, how did this all happen? And what's the big secret? And so we submitted that to publishers, and I was so grateful because I got a 2-book deal with HQ, which was absolutely brilliant. But when it came to sit down and write Safe and Sound, I had no clue what the answer was. Like, I'd set up this hook and I did not know at all. And I wrote 3 outlines, binned 2 of them, completely rewrote. Oh, yeah, but I got there in the end. But yeah, it was quite tough.
It sounds it, and I can really feel for you, because it can be really hard trying to build a novel from one conversation or one idea that you've had with someone, and they just immediately be like, yep, just give it to us, and we don't even know what it is about. So I do feel for you there. And I certainly think it can be a challenge when you are talking to your editor, because the publishing industry is such a nice industry. Everyone's really lovely and they say such lovely things to you, and that can be a little bit tricky when you actually need them just to be honest. And so for authors, it can be a little bit about reading between the lines in what they're saying and what they're meaning. Tom, how did you find this process when you came to write your second novel?
I think you hit the nail on the head there, really. You're thrown into a completely different industry to one that you're used to. And, I had a background in journalism and marketing, and I was used to that industry. But then I was a complete novice when it came to writing, the novel writing industry, as opposed to writing novels. I'd written a few of those before I actually managed to get published. But then all of a sudden I was offered this contract for the first book, A Quiet Death in Italy, and which was fantastic. And I was given a 3-book deal with Constable, which was brilliant. And everyone was really excited by it. And you're right, it's a very, very nice industry. Everyone you meet is extremely enthusiastic and positive. But at the same time, you're aware that it's an industry and it's a business. And all of a sudden, having, completed a book, which actually I had already written twice, because the first version of my Bologna set mystery I had written over a period of about 18 months and then submitted it to agents, and it hadn't been successful. And then I'd gone through a whole kind of process of working with the literary consultancy to write a whole new book based on the same premise, which was finally accepted by an agent and a publisher. And then all of a sudden, wow, you know, you're being published, you've got this deal, and you know, you're meeting the editors and so on, and they said, well, look, can you give us some suggestions? And you know, you kind of rack your brain, and you know, I gave them about 5 suggestions, and of course they picked the final one, the one I'd thrown in right at the end, because I just thought, oh well, this is not a bad idea, but I'm not really sure. I had no idea how I was going to write it, but it was, you know, the theme of the second book is about the counterfeit truffle industry in my part of Italy, and it's a great story. The trouble is, you know, I knew next to nothing about the counterfeit truffle industry. To be honest, I mean, I'm probably the worst person to live in industry in Italy, because I never really had that great an interest in food. You know, I miss pies, you know, in England. and all of a sudden I was, you know, they were really enthusiastic about this, you know, 30-word blurb that I had just sort of, you know, chucked at them, and all of a sudden I was supposed to like deliver it in a year, and I thought, okay, so I was pretty terrified about that, and I was also conscious, coming back to your point about reading between the lines, that although everyone's very nice, it's a real business. You know, they're expecting you to deliver, and not only to deliver, but to deliver something that's really good. You know, my editors are lovely people, but they're also, you know, really shrewd and really smart. And so I wasn't going to get anything by them. And so I immediately threw myself into writing this truffle-themed difficult, tricky second novel. And I'd never even heard of that, actually. I'd heard of the tricky third album, but not the tricky second novel. Anyway, and so I wrote it really quickly, because I was so terrified that, you know, that something would go wrong, that they wouldn't like it, or something like that. And so I wrote it in about 6 months, and it's 80,000 words in 6 months. And, you know, I showed it to my wife, I showed it to my agent, and they both said the same thing. They both said they liked it, and then they both added, we were really surprised, you know, by how much they liked it. So I wasn't really sure how to take that, but anyway, then I submitted it to my editor, feeling quite confident about this, and my editor, you know, came back to me. There was a kind of, you know, it was over a bank holiday. It was just before a bank holiday, and you know, she wrote a sort of quite a short email saying, you know, thanks very much for this. It was one of these kind of classic emails, you know, thanks very much for this. There's a lot of good things in this novel, but I'd like to talk to you about it, you know, after the bank holiday. And I thought, well, great, thanks for that. And then we had like this Zoom in which my agent popped up unexpectedly, because my publisher had asked I felt a bit like I was going to the headmaster's office, you know, and in the nicest possible way, my editor quite rightly pulled this, you know, this novel apart. And actually she said that, you know, she said, oh, well, I'm sorry, I'm sorry to say this, but it looks like you've got tricky second novel syndrome. And I'd never heard of this before. And I was like, but she kind of, you know, she went through everything that was wrong with it. And at the end of this Zoom, because one thing I will say is that having a background in journalism, I am used to having my copy thrown back at me. And she didn't actually say this, but I said, look, from what I'm hearing from you, I've just got to dump this novel and just write a whole new novel. And she said, well, yes, basically. And so that's what I did. Fortunately, I had another 6 months to write one.
And then the next one was okay, was it?
Yeah, they loved it.
Oh, good. That's a relief. I must imagine if they'd made you wait another bank holiday weekend to tell you that, it would have been very nerve-wracking.
No. I mean, you know, the relief I've learned to kind of, calibrate the difference in tone now, because they always say things nicely, but you can tell in the difference of tone, the relief pouring through their kind of comments. And they loved it. And I have to say, everything that they said was spot on. And, I learned a huge amount in the process.
That's so true. And I do completely sympathise with you, because I also had my first attempt at a second book completely rejected. And it can really knock your confidence and really add to the pressure that we've already under for book 2. Because with book 1, we've got so much time, so much lovely time to write this book, and we edit it and edit it and edit it before anyone even sees it. And then you work with it with your agent, and then they get it all edited with you. And what lands on the editor's desk at your publishing house is a very polished book 1 that often then doesn't need the same level of structural edits as another book might. So we're sort of lulled with our debut into this idea that actually this structural editing business is actually not that bad. But book 2, you have none of that luxury, and you've got no time to keep editing. And sometimes, your agent might not have the same time either. And it's all about what your editor thinks anyway. So it goes and lands on their desk, and it can be a very different story. Nikki, how did you find this aspect of the process of writing your book 2?
Yes, it was a bit of a nightmare, Lauren. I think you're so right in that kind of, with the debut, those structural edits are, for most people, or for a lot of people anyway, they're pretty minimal, because it's been through so many changes yourself. You've edited and edited and edited, as you say, then your agents had a look at it. So I think I was definitely lulled into a full sense of security. I got my deal. I had a 2-book deal with Orion, which I got back in kind of January 2019. And I knew that my debut wouldn't be launched until April 2020. So I kind of had a year basically to write that second novel. And every author I'd spoken to said, make sure that you have finished that second novel by the time your first one comes out, because you are going to be kind of overwhelmed with everything that's going on. And as it happened, COVID hit, and it was a slightly different experience for me compared to a lot of other people, I think. But that was the kind of idea at the time. So I thought, right, I've got a year. And so off I went merrily and wrote my second novel, which, as Philippa said, I didn't even have to come up with an idea actually for my second novel when I got my book deal. I was very lucky, I think, and they wanted the first one, and the second one I said, don't really know what I'm going to write at the moment, and they were like, no, that's fine, you can just think of something at the time and whatever. So off I went with my idea, and handed book 2 in to my editor in March 2020, just before I went to see my debut novel roll off the press in Clays in Suffolk. This was just before we went into lockdown. So I handed it into her probably about a week before we went up to Clays. And again, like Tom, there was a kind of bit of a resounding silence, and then she just kind of sent me an email and said, let's have a chat on the train on the way up. And of course, not knowing really how this process works, I was like, oh, brilliant, yeah, let's have a chat on the train, that'll be great. And as you say, a lot of it is kind of what's happening behind the scenes, that you kind of, after you've been in this business a bit of a while, you can read between the lines. But at the time I was so kind of naive and also very excited to be going to see my debut novel roll off the press that I thought, oh, brilliant, we're going to just have a quick chat and that'll be fine. So we had quite a lengthy chat on the train on the way up, and it was kind of slowly dawned on me that perhaps the draft that I'd handed in wasn't quite as good as I thought it would be, or I thought it was. But it was kind of the whole body blow was kind of sheltered by the fact that I was there to see my debut novel kind of roll off the presses. So I was kind of so excited by that I think it kind of, you know, took away the kind of terror that kind of hit in about a week later, when I realized, yes, I was going to have to rewrite most of this novel. We kind of kept the same story. It was the same kind of central theme, I would say, but and some of the characters stayed the same, but huge chunks of it changed. And it was basically kind of, a 3-month, you know, completely rip it apart and kind of do it again. So yes, it was interesting. But it's out now, so I can kind of laugh about it. But I wouldn't want to go through that again.
No, I can imagine you wouldn't. It sounds very stressful indeed. Let's talk about life changes for a minute, because one of the things that I think is often overlooked is that the time that goes between book 1 and book 2, so much can happen in that time. It's often a year between writing one book and another book. We can have moved house, we can have got different jobs, our whole lives could have completely changed, and then that can really change the writing process for us, and the time we have and the experience that we have with it. Now, Emily, I believe that you had quite a different experience between writing book 1 and book 2. Can you tell us about that, please?
Yeah, I mean, it was totally my own fault. And actually thinking about it, the real crux of it is that I was really lucky in the writing of my first book, that I had an easy ride in terms of my lifestyle, because I'd left my job. I was trying to write a book. It wasn't happening around my day job. And I thought, I knew I wanted to change jobs. I thought, I'll take a year out, try and write a book. If it doesn't happen, I'll go and find my next job. And I was really, really lucky. I had a year where I just wrote. I did an MA in creative writing and I wrote. I mean, doesn't that sound amazing now? Like, for most people, I realise, are writing around jobs and kids and all sorts of other things. I had this year where I was kind of dramatically like, oh, I can't write today. And have a day off, or, you know, going and sitting in cafes all day and then sitting up all night drinking wine, and I was up really late last night writing. Anyway, fine, got my book deal, got pregnant, so I was doing edits on my first book whilst pregnant. Book 1 came out when my eldest daughter was 9 months old. And by that point, I was then working on book 2 and realizing what a life I had and realizing how much harder it was to do anything. I mean, around anything else, around, you know, I was back to what I'd been struggling with before, writing around a full-time job, pretty much doing the same, but just around kids. So I had a 9-month-old, you know, at my ankles, working on book 2. Then this was the best idea. I got pregnant again. As I say, it was, you know, my own fault. This was all planned. It seemed a great idea at the time. It was a great idea, if my kids can hear. So I was pregnant with a 1-year-old, 18-month-old, writing book 2, and it was horrendous. I felt so ill. I was so tired, and I just thought, I can't do this. And I just remember emailing my agent. I was working on a second draft, and he didn't know I was pregnant. But I was like, I can't do this, Peter. No, it's not happening. And he sent me a really lovely email back with a kind of pep talk. But yeah, just the complete change. You know, I couldn't do the all-nighters. I was writing, had some childcare, but mostly was writing in nap times and evenings and weekends. And then I also, because it was, my book deals were slightly different to what some of you have described. So I had 1 book deal for my first one, and then I got a 2-book deal for books 2 and 3. But I did have a deadline for that second book. The deadline, I used to have the piece of paper up on my desk. I haven't anymore. I think the deadline to get the final copy edits, I think, was about 5 days before my due date. But we got it in, it was all done in time. Along the way, the first draft I handed my editor was all the characters felt sick all the time. Like any emotional response, there was no like eye rolling or shrugging or any of that usual stuff. They just felt sick constantly. And I just didn't notice at any point during my read throughs. And she's like, did you experience any morning sickness? So that needed some editing, but we got it done, and then did the final proofread kind of during the middle of the night when I was up with the baby. And now I'm writing book 3 and I'm not pregnant and I'm not going to have a baby. And I don't know if I can do it without having a baby. And I might just have to have a baby each book. And my husband is terrified.
I can just imagine that. Wow, I'm in complete awe of you, Emily. That just sounds like a lot to juggle. And how lucky that your second baby didn't arrive 5 days early.
Oh, no, yeah.
That would have really put a bit of a spanner in the works. I can almost imagine you in labour, just typing away really quickly. So, I mean, so amazing. And it's those kind of life events that can really add to the pressure that we already feel for book 2. You know, our it's almost like two worlds, isn't there? We have our world where we have a little cave and we write our books, and we have the real world. And when there's stuff going on in both of those, it can just feel very stressful and a lot of pressure for authors. And that's pressure on top of this idea that you're trying to create and do the same trick twice, if you like, because what you want is the same as book 1, a great book that's in the same genre, and that the readers are going to love just as much as book 1. So it's similar, but not the same, and it has enough differences. And it's all these box ticking that you need to do, which can just really, really add to the pressure. Now, Trevor, I think you must have felt quite an enormous amount of pressure with your book 2, because if I'm right, your book 1 went from a standalone to becoming a series. Is that correct?
Yeah. I was that was a surprise to me.
Yeah.
I was writing a book about a homeless veteran who sees a murder and kind of gets involved in helping to work out what's happened. But for me, that was an obvious standalone. The kind of USP of it is that it's set in the real world. It's very firmly based in the homeless community, and I really didn't want it to become like Midsummer Murders. I didn't want a homeless guy tripping over bodies for years to come, solving murders that the police aren't interested in. It kind of takes it away from what the books are all about, really. But literally every editor who showed any kind of interest in it at all kept saying, but it's a series, you've got to write a series. And I was going, I don't want to write a series, it's a one-off. But in the end, you get the message, don't you? You kind of have to, really. So I started to kind of think about it, and I had one editor. I mean, it was out on submission for ages for a start, so I had quite a lot of time to think. And I couldn't really at first see ways to do it, but one editor gave me some notes and I started to work on it. And I mean, several things. I had to bring characters back to life. I'd killed off one of the main characters and I thought, well, I need him for book 2. So I resurrected him. He's like Lazarus, he just came back to life again. In fact, there were 2 characters who died in the original book 1 who are both in book 2. But I think if you're going to do a series, you probably want to plan it in advance. So I didn't do any of that. I didn't have any long-running story that kind of keeps going throughout the series, apart from maybe the relationships. So I didn't really have any idea, and I didn't really have ideas about what future crimes my homeless guy might solve that the police wouldn't have solved in 10 minutes before he got involved. So I had to start coming up with ideas really of things that, not that the police wouldn't be interested in, but that might not be crimes that are being really reported or followed up at all. So I started to think, okay, if, for instance, One Way Street is about young runaway teenagers who are being found dead that nobody can really identify, that there's nobody out there who cares about very much. So that I kind of thought, okay, I can see that maybe my guy can get involved in that a bit. So I started to come up with ideas. But the other problem was, in the first book, because Jimmy is a homeless veteran, and we kind of catch him after everything that's happened to him in the last 25 years, there are lots of little flashbacks about his life story, if you like. And they're all hugely significant. There's some quite hideous things that happens to him that means he ends up on the street. And when I came to book 2, I thought, well, I'm now writing for readers who have read book 1, and that's fine. But I'm also writing for readers who haven't read book 1. And there are so many things that happen there that they really need to know about, because this guy's got some heavy baggage to lift. So it took me ages to work out how to drop in little bits of the first book into the second book, so that I wouldn't bore the readers who already knew it, but would also keep the new readers informed. And I think in my head, it took me about 9 months to write the first 10,000 words of book 2, and about 6 months to write the next 70,000, because I just kept thinking, I've written too much that's in book 1, you know, I've been repeating myself, and I edited forever. So I guess my message out there, look, I know there are people who would sacrifice their firstborn to get the chance to write a series, but plan your series. Don't have it thrust upon you. But, you know, as Nikki says, the second book is now out there. The hardback's out in June. Ebook's out, been out a while, and it seems to be going okay. So eventually it worked, but yeah, it was a shock.
Gosh, yeah, it does sound like it's really added to the pressure. Wow, you guys have had some really tough times, and it certainly shows that we're not alone in having our tricky second novels, that's for sure. So whether it's time pressures, life commitments, edits or rewrites, or changing a standalone to a series, there is a lot that makes book 2 so much trickier to write. And I'd love to open up the discussion now among all of you. So if there's anybody watching who has any questions, please do put them in the chat, and I will try and get around to asking them as well. But my first question is probably the big question, which is for all of you. What one thing about writing a second novel makes it so much harder than writing your first? So what was the one thing for you guys?
Imposter syndrome.
Oh, that's a good one.
I think that's the one thing that, you know, with your first book, nobody expects you to do well. In fact, pretty much everyone expects you to fail, no matter how much they support you. Nothing's expected of that first book. You might even just be doing it for fun. And then that second book, I don't think I've spoken to another author who doesn't think that it was a fluke. I mean, we've got a Dagger winning novelist here, at least one other that's been shortlisted. I'm pretty sure that everyone has felt the same. Like, well, everyone is going to realize that I could only write the one book, and they're going to realize when they read this that, you know, what have they done? Why have they invested in me?
That was the first thing I had written down as well, Emily. Imposter syndrome was the first thing I wrote down. I think it's also that you pretty much write the first one for yourself, don't you? You're writing the book to please you and not anybody else. You've got no other masters. You might have some friendly writers who will read it and that kind of thing, but really you're writing the book that you want to write, that you think is great. But when you come to write the second one, you've probably got an agent, you've probably got an editor, you may have a contract for it, and you've got all these masters to please. And suddenly the pressure is kind of fivefold, that you're not just writing it for you, you're thinking, oh God, what if my agent hates it? What if my editor hates it? What if my readers hate it, if you've got readers? So there's far too many people to please, I think, and the pressure feels immense.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's expectation, isn't it? I think, Trevor, that's the thing with the first one. You're just, there is no expectation, as you said, Emily. I think everyone thinks you're going to fail, and you're used to, you know, you kind of, you know, so many of my friends, you know, have tried writing one and the first one doesn't succeed, and so it's kind of a huge shock, really, when you get published. Whereas the second one, there is this expectation from your agent and your editor that you will deliver something, and even though you kind of, people would say, well, you've done it before, you can do it again. You're literally sitting down again with a completely blank page and probably no idea to start with, unless you've been lucky enough to have some ideas when you've been writing the first one, but you haven't really been thinking about that because you've been too busy thinking about writing the first one. And it's kind of, you feel like you're starting completely from scratch and you had no idea how you did it the first time and how you're going to do it again. So yeah, it's quite terrifying, I think.
Yeah, and I think I echo everything that you guys have said. And I think for me, what I found hard was that I felt like my first book, Little White Lies, was really a book from the heart. Like I knew the characters so well. They'd been with me for such a long time. You know, I'd kind of written a lot of myself into the book in various ways, which, you know, we all do a little bit, right? But it felt such a, you know, it was the book of my heart. And then when I was coming to write book 2, which kind of like writing to order, you know, like I say, we've got a contract, we've got readers waiting, blah, blah, blah. Everything felt so two-dimensional to me. It felt like I didn't care about my characters. I wasn't interested in them. I was just kind of it felt like making the story up rather than, you know, transcribing what was real in my head. And I also experienced all those things about expectations, and I knew about second book syndrome. And to be honest, I just adopted the attitude that this book was going to be totally crap. And I just was like, there's nothing I can do about it. I'm like, Little White Lies is the best book I'm ever going to write. I'm never going to write anything better. So it's going to be totally pants. And I just got on with it. and it was really late in the day that my characters came to life for me, and that the world and the story came to life for me. And it really surprised me when I delivered it to my editor. After a major rewrite, I'll just spell this out. It was a massive rewrite first with my agent. But when I delivered it to my editor, I was totally shocked when she said, I think it's even better than your first. And I was like, what? And it didn't make sense to me. But I don't know, other people have said the same thing. So I don't know, it was weird. So my kind of advice, I think, would be is like, just keep writing it even though you don't feel connected with it, because probably your first one was something that you had to write because it was a passion, it wouldn't leave you alone and the idea was so alive to you. But your second book characters and story can come alive to you too, so just keep chipping away at it.
I think that's really great advice. Tom, did you have anything you wanted to add as well about what makes book 2 so tricky?
Yeah, I think we're all in the same boat, really. I mean, I used to work in public health marketing, where we used to try to persuade people not to do things that they wanted to do, you know, like drink and, you know, sleep with too many people and so on. And what we used to try to do is create this kind of thing called cognitive dissonance, where people were kind of shocked into kind of readdressing their modes of behavior. And obviously I'm not going to go too much into the science of that here, but I think as writers we become so used to rejection. You know, rejection is the kind of prevailing force of being an aspiring writer. You know, you're constantly told that, I don't know, what 1 in 100, you know, books get published and so on and so forth. And, you know, there are very, very few authors who haven't received tons of rejections from agents, and even when their books have been picked up by agents, from publishers and so on. That, you know, as Emily was saying, that there is this kind of, you know, strong sense of imposter syndrome when finally, wow, you've somehow got published. You actually have this sense of cognitive dissonance because it goes so against the grain of everything that you are used to, and it's kind of disruptive, because all of a sudden you're in this kind of very unfamiliar place, and all of a sudden you're a professional writer, and all of a sudden you're having to deliver another book on top of the kind of emotional shock almost of actually finally getting published. And coming back to something that Philippa was talking about, you know, the first book really, if you consider that it was actually, again, the sum of 2 books, took, years to write. And honestly, I probably spent days going over paragraphs. There are kind of lines of description and all of these things that, writers write and are often just kind of missed, and in a sense should be missed by the reader, because they're there to kind of create the story, even though you've put tons of effort into trying to make the story seem seamless. But when you kind of come to the second book, well, you've got to deliver it in a year, and I personally feel that I always want to write something better than the thing that I wrote before as well. Even though I kind of put, as Philippa said, my heart and soul into book 1, I wanted to not only put my heart and soul into book 1, I wanted to make it a better book. and that's really putting a lot of pressure on yourself. That's that. I think that was also kind of part of, that was one of the factors really that I think kind of also kind of, created this sort of sense of panic at the beginning. Not only have I got to not only has it got to be as good as book 1, but it's actually got to be better. Because also, of course, you can see your own flaws in book 1. So you want to make book 2 better, and and I've just finished book 3, and I really wanted to make book 3 better than book 1 and book 2. So it's just never ending,
I think you're absolutely right. The pressure that we put on ourselves is, I think, maybe more than the pressure that comes from anybody else, whether it's editors or agents or anything else. Me personally, it's coming from inside, I think, and I think that's a really common theme for authors. But it can't have been all bad. So come on then, what was better about book 2 than book 1? There must have been some good things.
I think you've definitely got access to more help. You might not know any other writers when you're writing book 1. Quite a lot of people write on their own, don't share it at all. Tom and Nikki and Philippa and I are all part of a group called D20s, debut 20s, whatever, and we've now got about 70 writers in similar positions to us that we can kind of complain to. We can throw our problems at them. We meet up every Friday. And that sometimes becomes like a clinic on what's going wrong with your book. And you've got 20 writers throwing ideas in. So there is a lot more help available to you that you wouldn't have had for book 1, I think. That's a big thing.
Yeah, and I think not only help from our peers, whoop, D20 authors. Sorry, they told me that we had to mention them.
I'm very jealous that my debut came out in 2019, by the way.
I know. But so you have your peers and your friends that you might have met as fellow writers, but also I think you have an agent and probably an editor and an agent that's still in position. And I think the fact that they believe in you, and that you now have a team, it's like a team effort. And even at the practical level of having someone that you can send your outline to that will give you some really helpful feedback on it, and you're not just slaving away on your own. You've got people that you really can draw on, and I would certainly recommend to people that they do draw on it. If you have an agent who's kind of editorial, or your editor is happy to see early material, then just use them. Like, don't make it harder on yourself than it has to be. Just ask them for help, run stuff by them. You're paying your agent at the end of the day, and your editor wants to publish a really good book from you. So yeah,
I think that's really great advice.
I think the other thing is, it depends really whether you read your reviews, but something that really helped me when I was working on my second book was the reviews that were coming in for my debut, which some were positive. And the ones that were saying, "Oh, I can't wait to see or read what she does next," or that kind of thing really spurred me on. And so having that positive feedback from readers, as well as having the other writers and the agent and the editor this time, you're also starting to build a reader base that will cheerlead you.
Yeah, and I'd echo all of that, and I'd also say, you know, as Philippa said, use your editor and your agent. I think one of the things about writing a debut is you don't necessarily know where you're going wrong, and when you're trying to get that deal, you're just, you know, the feedback you get is often quite kind of generic, and you're not quite sure what it is about it that's wrong. Whereas at least with your second novel, you have other people who are invested in the process, and they want to make your book as good as it can be. So they will give very critical, on point kind of feedback, and that can really help, because it's just somebody seeing it in a slightly different kind of light that can change the whole way you write something or your opinion on it. So that is a positive. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point as well there. Well, I think you've really perked me up now. I was starting to really worry about everyone who still had their book twos to go. Talking about reviews, I'm throwing this question in, you don't even know it's coming actually, but talking about reviews, did any of you read anything that sort of was critiqued from reviewers that then sort of made you rethink how you did things for book two? Like sometimes you can get told that you didn't even realize that you were nodding, all your characters are nodding too much, like, oh God, yeah, I didn't realize that. Was there anything, I know they always say don't read reviews, but we all do. Was there anything that you took away from your reviews that you changed the way you did?
Philippa famously doesn't read reviews, so she's got nothing to give here, I think.
Wow, kudos to you, Philippa.
I'll just chip in before everyone else answers. I started a club, which Penny but just mentioned in the chat, called the Don't Read or Don't Look, Don't Cry Club, because I just saw so many posts from authors like going, I've just read a review and I feel shit, and I was like, okay, I'm not going to do that then. So yeah, that works for me. But yeah, anyway,
I love it. We just had a comment up from Inga saying, I read the 1-star ones because they are hilarious, and they absolutely can be, can't they?
Yeah, I'm trying to think in answer to your question though. I don't think I changed anything based on reviews. I take stuff on board. I mean, I quite enjoy reading both the positive and the negative. It just gives you a sense of where you're hitting with different people, and maybe the kind of people that aren't your readers. I find quite an interesting thing to think about. But yeah, it hasn't really changed how I've written. I don't know what the rest of you think.
I'm coming to the conclusion that, which is pretty obvious really, that every writer has their readers, and particularly when you're debuting, you have to kind of cast the net quite widely, and there are going to be some readers that love your book and other readers that don't like your book so much. I definitely learned from comments from about the first book, which in a sense echoed some of my own feelings, and tried to integrate things that I'd learned from constructive comments about the first book into the second book. But at the same time, I think you have to be careful, because different readers really love different things about your book. And so, you can read one reader review which will say, oh, for example, I wish the plot moved more quickly, or what have you, let's just say. And so you think, yeah, well, actually, yeah, I this time around I should make, the plot move, more quickly. And then someone else will give you a review for your second book saying, oh, I really liked the kind of way that they slowly developed the plot in the first book. And, this book, the plot moves too quickly. And so I think that you do have to, because I think there's a huge amount that you can learn from reader reviews, actually. And I really have tried to. But I think you also have to be slightly objective about it. And I think that you also have to sort of have in mind, really, the kind of reader that you want to be reading your work in the long term, and aim for them, because they're going to be the people that kind of, stay with you. and stay loyal to you. And one thing particularly that strikes me, because my books are set in Italy, and a large component of my book has always been because I was inspired by this non-fiction writer Norman Lewis, who wrote a lot of books about Italy back in the 50s, and I was really inspired by him, and I really wanted to, as much as being writing good mysteries, also kind of explore the mystery of Italy itself. And necessarily you're going to kind of have a lot of comments and descriptions of Italy in your novel, if that's what you want to do. And on the whole, I think that people buy my books because they are interested in Italy. But you do get crime readers who read my books and say, well, all these descriptions of Italy got in the way of a good crime story,
Yeah, I think you can't please everybody. That's the thing, can you? And I think that if you have reviews, that if you had a series of reviews that all said the same thing, I think that we'd probably all take notice of that. If there was one thing that came up in kind of 25, 50 reviews that you hadn't done X, or this was rubbish, or your plot wasn't pacey enough, then you probably would sit up and kind of take notice. But I don't think you can please everybody. So you have to write, the story for you and what you want to tell and how you want to tell it, and just hope that appeals to a broad readership, I think.
I think that's absolutely brilliant advice there, Nikki. So we're coming up to the end of the show, but I would love to know, if you had a time machine and could go back to visit yourself just before starting your tricky second novel, what advice would you give to yourself to help you? Philippa, do you want to kick us off with that one?
Oh, God. It would be, you think this is bad, wait till you get to book 3.
Oh, don't, all our poor oh, it's just book 2, book 3 will be fine, just got to get over tricky book 2.
No, I think to be honest, I think that we're always learning as authors, and actually one thing that I've learned recently is that the strengths that we have as authors will take us so far, and there might come a point where we just have to really dig down and stretch our skill set a little bit. And I think that, to be honest, with book 2, I thought I was going to be the only author ever who was going to completely fail to deliver their second book. And yes, everybody talks about second book syndrome, and yeah, but everyone gets through it. But I would be the one person who never got through it. And I would be the one person who just hit the wall and could never get over it. But you absolutely will. And I'm still holding on to that when I'm hitting difficulties now, and remember that you have got people to help you. You have got people that believe in you, and you can't have become a worse writer. There's absolutely no way. You can't get worse at something like writing, so if you were good enough to write your first book, and yes, it was under different conditions, and these conditions are a lot harder, but you can do it. There might just be something that's not working at the moment that has been a blind spot for you because you didn't need to address it in your first book, or it might be to do with the conditions that you're under now, which make it different. So there's maybe a new challenge or something that you need to learn about or get a little bit better at, but you will do it, yeah, you will.
There was a great, I don't know if everybody saw it, but if they didn't, they should. There was a really good piece in The Guardian recently by, I think he's called Colin McCann. He's a writer and creative writing teacher, which was full of fantastic tips, I thought, but the best one of them all, and he repeated it several times, was get your ass in the chair. Just sit down and write the damn thing. You can edit it later, just get words on a page. Don't stop, just keep going and you'll get
right.
through.
You're absolutely right, Trevor. In fact, I say that to myself every single day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sit down in that chair.
Even if it looks uncomfortable and you're really not in the mood, just sit down and write.
Yes.
That's your job, basically. Get on with it.
That was going to be my when I was working on book 2, draft 2, and sent that panicked email to my agent. His email that came back was, I've got it stuck on my desk up here, and blah, blah, blah. The thing is just to keep going, keep turning up at your desk and working on the book.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And that is what I wish I'd known kind of, well, you do know it because that's what you're doing, but just to know that that's, I mean, yeah. My agent represents Colm Tabine and Kazuo Ishiguro and Kate Atkinson. Like, he's always telling me stories about how these people also struggle, and that's the same advice that he gives to everyone.
Yeah, I'd echo that, and I'd also say, as Trevor said, just keep going, because sometimes it's not until you get to the end of that first draft that you actually realise who your characters are and what you're writing about, and that's very different from, I think, the debut novels that you write. And as you said, Philippa, you know, your characters can feel two-dimensional all the way through, but you just need to kind of keep going, get to the end, and then you can go back and change it all again.
I would say what it says on the cover of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Don't panic.
I think that's great. And I think we can see from the comments that are popping up, and I can feel it too. You guys have given us so much inspiration and some fantastic advice, and sharing your stories is going to give so many people that support that they need for their tricky book twos. So thank you very much for that. We are at the end of our hour. So that's all we've got time for, which leaves me with the final job of saying a very big thank you to our 5 amazing panelists, Nikki, Emily, Trevor, Philippa and Tom. You have all been amazing, and to have opened up as you have done has been really brilliant and so interesting. So thank you very much. Thank you also to everybody who has commented, who's turned up to watch, and who watches at home at another point. Thank you. And to the Stay at Home Literary Festival for putting the panel on. Thank you very much. Now, all the books discussed here can be bought from the link below, and also at uk.bookshop.org by searching the Stay at Home Literary Festival shop. And I think, having heard just how hard they were all to write, that we all should now go rush and buy them. So that's all we've got time for, and I will leave you with that thought. So thank you for watching, and goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Lauren.